northern England and North Wales by the end of the night as a weakening feature. 1 or 2 showers breaking out elsewhere across England and Wales ahead of that, but otherwise a lot of fine weather as we begin Friday. A milder start for England and Wales, but a cooler start for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But Scotland and Northern Ireland sees more sunshine on Friday compared with Thursday. Plenty of fine weather here before thicker cloud arrives into the far northwest later. Across England and Wales, the front, as it moves south, becomes a showery feature, and there'll be some heavy downpours in places on Friday afternoon. Hit and miss, thunderstorms perhaps as well, before more settled weather returns on.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. It's a world turned upside down. The Conservative Party is pursuing socialist housing policies, and the Labour Party is pursuing conservative housing policies. Who knew Michael Gove was such a lefty? Well, the opposition is brewing here on State of the Nation. Have you ever wondered the best way to incentivise illegal migration? How about paying imprisoned illegal migrants £1,500 to go back to Albania? Because that's precisely what His Majesty's government has been doing. In effect, helping these criminals to pay people smugglers with the £1,500 they've just been given to bring them back into the UK again, so they can get another £1,500 and go back again and again and again. The Just Stop Oil fanatics are at it once more, interrupting a Home Affairs Committee this morning. Perhaps someone should remind them, if they really wish to get into Parliament, the best thing to do would be to stand for Parliament. Plus, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have had a rather eventful afternoon over in Manhattan. That's what they tell us. The story gets curiouser and curiouser, and we will be calling upon Sherlock Rees-Mogg to investigate.
I would find it hard to believe that there was a 2-hour high-speed chase. That would be, I find it hard to believe.
Mayor of New York, Eric Adams there. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be joined by my illustrious panel, the pugnacious former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. As ever, I want to hear from you, and by now you know what to do. It's mailmog@gbnews.uk. But for the time being, it's some revitalising news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. The top story tonight on GB News. Prince Harry claims he, his wife Meghan and her mother were involved in a near-catastrophic car chase involving the paparazzi in Manhattan. A spokesperson for the couple said the incident happened after they attended an awards ceremony in New York yesterday. The statement said the relentless pursuit, lasting over 2 hours, resulted in multiple near collisions involving other drivers on the road, pedestrians and 2 New York Police Department officers. Well, the NYPD has said they assisted the Duke and Duchess and the pair arrived at their destination with no reported collisions, injuries or arrests. New York City Mayor Eric Adams said public safety comes first and foremost.
Press, paparazzis, they want to get the right shot, they want to get the right story. But public safety must always be at the forefront. Of the briefing I received, 2 of our officers could have been injured, and it would be horrific to lose an innocent bystander during a chase like this, and something to have happened to them as well. So I think we have to be extremely responsible. I thought that was a bit reckless and irresponsible.
Well, in news here at home, one of the world's largest car manufacturers is warning it may have to close UK factories, meaning thousands of job losses, if the government doesn't renegotiate the Brexit deal. That's after Stellantis, which owns brands like Vauxhall and Citroën, said the current agreement will affect its export and manufacturing operations within the UK. The company says without changes, it'll struggle to make electric vehicles at Ellesmere Port and Luton. The European Automobile Manufacturers Association is requesting a 3-year extension phase-in for the tougher post-Brexit rules. Former Brexit negotiator Lord Frost told GB News this will test UK-EU relations.
Would not be sensible to reopen the entire trade agreement. This particular issue was one of the last to be settled in 2020. The car industry was happy with it at the time, but obviously a lot's changed in the energy electric vehicle world since then. Let's see. If the government does decide they want to see if this problem can be fixed, well, it's a good test of whether our new, warmer relationship with the EU can actually deliver anything.
And lastly, Labour wants to give local areas the power to build houses on greenbelt land, on the condition it won't impact areas of natural beauty. Sir Keir Starmer told the British Chambers of Commerce that increasing housing supply would lead to lower property prices. The party says it wants to restore a target of building 300,000 houses every year if it wins the next general election. It comes as the Prime Minister was forced to drop plans for compulsory housing targets after a backlash from backbench MPs. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Michael Gove's new Renters Reform Bill is an extraordinary attack on landlords, which will make life worse for tenants. Unfortunately, it's continued a set of policies that have made it harder for landlords. This includes increasing environmental rules and the inability to offset interest against rental income, the only type of business where you cannot offset the full cost of interest against the income from the business. And this will have a bad effect on tenants as well as landlords. When Margaret Thatcher opened up the market in the 1980s, it grew prodigiously. What had happened before is that increasing regulation had meant people left the private rental market. Why? Because they couldn't get their properties back, because the rights of property had been undermined. What this did was meant that people who wanted to rent found there was no property available, or if there was any property available, it was at high prices. And that's why the worst element of this bill is actually getting rid of Section 21, the ability to remove people without any wrongdoing, because that's the fundamental heart of a property right. It is my property, and I am therefore entitled to have it back with a reasonable period of notice. I think you're obliged to give a month or two's notice to get your property back. And this ensures that there is a regular supply. Now, I am personally a landlord, so I do have an interest in this, though not in an important way. It's a minor part of what I do. But nobody is compelled to enter a tenancy agreement, neither the landlord nor the tenant. And if it doesn't seem to be fair to both sides, then the landlords will not make the contracts available. And this applies not just to Section 21, not just to the ability to get your own property back, but it also relates to things in relation to pets. That if you own a property, surely it's up to you to decide whether you want pets or not. And if pets are going into properties, then many people will ask for higher deposits because there may be more cleaning involved and so on when the tenants leave. Again, making it more expensive for tenants. And it fails to meet the real problem, which is that we haven't been building enough houses in the first place. All this will do was disincentivize landlords, decrease supply, that will push up prices. And if we go down that route rather than making it easier for landlords to increase supply, we will find that we have fewer rental properties, a less mobile workforce, a lower ability for people to move to where jobs are. The Labour Party, on the other hand, has actually gone in the other direction to look at the real problem. And I must confess, I'm impressed by what they're talking about, to say that there may be parts of the Green Belt that can be built on, that some parts of the Green Belt are not areas of outstanding natural beauty. They are ex-industrial sites that, because they're in the Green Belt, are protected. Not all Green Belt land is beautiful. And to say that some of it can be built on, if that is what local authorities want to do, is what will, in reality, ease the housing problem by building more houses. And this is what a Conservative government should be doing, rather than attacking the landlord. It's a pity that we're going down the wrong route. As always, I want to hear what you think, and you know how to do that, because you're better at technology than I am. It's mailmog@gbnews.uk. But I'm very pleased to be joined now, once again, by Michael Walker, who is himself a renter, and he, from the left, will be defending the Conservative position. Michael, thank you for coming back on.
A pleasure.
You think that Michael Gove's got it right?
Well, I will be defending it with qualifications, so I think it's a move in the right direction. I think it is somewhat limited. I suppose there's a number of ways I can make this point. One, from personal experience, which is there is an increasing number of people who live in the private rental sector now. It used to be more of a waiting room between home ownership and, while you're waiting to become a homeowner. Now you've got lots of people living in the private rental sector for a long period of time, raising children, growing old. And if you live in the private sector right now, it's almost impossible to make future plans. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to live in the flat that I live in after August. I don't know because I might get kicked out. I also don't know because I might get a 20% rent increase. I got a 15% rent increase last summer. And you have to give, if you're going to have the private rental sector as a significant part of the housing system, you have to give people the conditions and the certainty where they can actually build their own lives.
But would you like to buy your own home?
Well, in the context that we are currently in the UK, yes, and that's because renting is not a good option. If I were to look at what I actually want, so what my ideal system would be, it would be something like Vienna, which is a city which is recognised by The Economist, so a free market magazine, as the best place to live in the world. 60% of people in Vienna live in social housing. And why I think that's brilliant is because you have the social mobility you talk about. People can move from place to place. You have less of a speculative economy, which I think tends to bring down an economy, to slow it down. And they have an incredibly successful economy, very, very high quality housing, very, very cheap housing. That's what I would ideally like.
OK, but we can't get from here to Vienna overnight. And it seems to me that the real issue that we're avoiding, that the government is avoiding, is the need to build more. We're going to hear about the immigration figures next week. The target of 300,000 has been got rid of. We're not building enough houses for the new families being created domestically, let alone for the immigration that's coming in. And it's a slight distraction, in my view, to be changing the rental rules.
Well, I mean, where I agree with you is I don't think the rental rules or change in the rental rules will solve the housing crisis. The housing crisis will be solved when there are more houses or when they're more fairly distributed. So it's potentially the case that there are many people who are sitting on more homes which they are under-occupying. So you could bring more onto the market by, for example, sort of raising council tax on people sitting on vacant properties. But you're right, the rental reform bill is not going to increase the supply of housing, and we do need to do other things to increase the supply of housing.
And vacant properties in the UK compared to other countries is at a very low level, and you always have some vacancies because of death, because of dilapidations. There is a turnover level of empty properties that we are probably below compared to other countries rather than particularly high. It's a marginal factor.
My understanding is that it's actually quite difficult to record which homes are empty and which aren't, because obviously, you know, you're quite inclined, if you're a wealthy person who's sitting on a property, to say, well, no, I do live there, and turn up every now and again. But where we agree is I don't think vacant properties are the real issue. I think we need more housing. You spoke about Margaret Thatcher sort of in your introduction. I think actually her reforms were very bad for housing, and that's not just because, you know, she sold off council housing, which I think there are benefits to. For example, it gave people the opportunity for home ownership. Her big problem was that she didn't use that money to build more council homes. And what we used to have is councils building, you know, 100,000 homes a year. Now, that really kept rents down. That's what we should be doing.
But at least when she was Prime Minister, we carried on building houses, whereas it really stops in the early 1990s. Other than Robert Jenrick, who made a real effort as Environment Secretary to build more properties, we haven't been getting up to the numbers that we need.
Yeah, but I mean, if I were to look at sort of the decades since the Second World War, it's not the 80s that I'd point to as when we built lots of housing. It's also not necessarily a Labour-Tory thing. Harold Macmillan built the most housing.
Indeed.
But that was in the 1950s when you were building sort of 300 to 350,000 homes a year. What we needed, I think Harold Macmillan in 1 year built 220,000 council homes. So this is what I'd like to get back to.
Look, I completely agree with this. I think that the government can incentivise this by giving the planning permissions that are needed.
Well, also by giving the councils the resources to build, right? So I have friends who work in sort of high up in London boroughs, in housing departments, and they are desperately trying to build more council homes, but they say the limit is we don't have the money to compete with the property developers.
We may disagree on this because I prefer the private sector doing it to the state. I think you're more likely to provide houses that people actually want.
You should go to Vienna, Jacob.
Or Singapore, and Singapore has a very popular public housing system. But if you look at opinion polling going back to the 1940s, 70% of people say they want a house with a garden, and the state has always wanted to try and persuade people to go into tower blocks, which 3% of people have said they actually like. So that's why I prefer the private sector, because it's more likely to deliver what people really want rather than what politicians think is good for them.
I mean, I would give anything to live in a flat where I wasn't concerned that my rent would go up by 15% in the summer. So I think there's potentially a generational thing here when it comes to houses with gardens. But there's also no reason why a state can't build houses with gardens. There are many estates which are built like that by the state.
This proposal will push your rent up because so many landlords will actually leave the market.
Well, so the way I look at this proposal, all other things being equal, it might reduce the supply of rental homes a little bit. It's definitely not going to increase it. But I think it's the bare minimum to make renting in the private sector tolerable. So do this and do other things.
I've let you have the last word. Thank you very much to Michael. I want to hear your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Coming up next, do you fancy a free £1,500 at the expense of the British taxpayer? Simply break into the country illegally and the government will handle the rest. A certain pugnacious former editor of The Sun will be weighing in with his views. And don't forget, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are making headlines again. This is very unusual. The mystery car chase, did it happen? Well, we will have some more answers for you shortly.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. And thank you, you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Danny says, Greenbelt land doesn't have to be beautiful to the eye to be important to the wildlife of the area. And Trevor says, like you, I agree with the Labour proposal, but it needs to go further. Social housing needs to go vertical too. I don't agree with that. This way, building more homes on a smaller footprint. On people who want tower blocks, I'd say, have you ever met a senior politician or a famous architect who lives in a state-built tower block? I bet you haven't. Anyway, for once, the BBC deserves praise for its special report, which has revealed a number of illegal migrants from Albania who found their way into British prisons, were then paid as much as £1,500 for voluntary deportation. The resettlement scheme was set up as part of an agreement signed between the UK and Albania back in December last year. But perhaps the least surprising part of the story was that some of the deported individuals in question told reporters they were planning to return to the UK, presumably using some of the money from the taxpayer-funded paycheck to get themselves back across the Channel. And perhaps they'll get another £1,500 when they're deported a second time. It's worth remembering the individuals who were paid this sum not only broke our immigration laws travelling from Albania, which is an entirely safe country, but then broke our ordinary domestic laws and found themselves incarcerated. Why on earth would the Home Office reward and incentivise behaviour of this kind? Well, I know one man who might have the answer to this question. He's a friend of the show. He's the human rights lawyer, Shaib Khan. Shaib, thank you so much for wanting to defend this. Is it reasonable to pay people who've broken the law money, which they can then use to buy their way back into Britain?
Hi, yeah. I'm not sure I'm actually going to be defending it much. Because of the way that the Home Office actually deals with this. I do agree with the concept. I agree with the principle, which is that people, if they've lodged claims here, they're found not to be entitled to remain in the UK, we should be supporting them in returning to the country, doing what we can to make sure that they are able to resettle there, reintegrate there. So I do agree with that principle. But what I don't agree with is how the Home Office does this. Now, obviously, the scheme, the Albania agreement you spoke about, is maybe just less than a year old. But the FRS, the Facilitated Return Scheme, is actually almost 15 years old. And so it has been ongoing. But I'm not sure in terms of the amount that we pay these people, whether it's actually been adjusted for inflation or the amount has gone up. And I think that's the whole point. The whole point, if we're saying to these people, look, you have this opportunity to remain in the UK, but don't take that opportunity, go back home, here's £1,500. Obviously, they might take that just because, like you're saying, it's a free £1,500. But it's not really going to get them very far, either in the UK or indeed in Albania, considering inflation and living expenses. So obviously, once they've exhausted that, they are going to want to find ways to come back here.
So do you think we should give them more money to go back so they can settle more comfortably, perhaps buy them a house in Albania that they could live in?
I don't think necessarily to buy a house, but at least be able to set up maybe some sort of business, maybe something. The whole point is, if we are doing this, then do it properly. As with most things that this government does, it does the bare minimum. And then that bare minimum does not actually help them meet the aims that they're trying to do. So either don't do this, don't waste taxpayers' money, or if you
I think what you're saying is extremely reasonable, actually. Either you do this properly and you say, we want you to go back, therefore we will set you up in a way that you will never want to leave again, and that's going to be a big investment. I'm not sure that would win much popular support, but at least it's a logical argument. Or you say, you've broken the law, you're going home, you get nothing. Giving them £1,500 is just a deposit on their next people trafficking cost of coming back to the UK.
Indeed. Like I said, obviously, if they want to take a quick holiday home, then yes, it makes sense for them to take the money. But then I'm sure within a few days, within a few weeks, indeed before they leave, they already know they're going to be coming back. So if the whole point is, here's some money to reintegrate yourself, resettle in a country you've not been in for years, then £1,500 is nothing. As with a lot that the Tories do, it is just, something, here's something that we're doing, to be seen to be doing something. But obviously that's nothing. So,
I'm going to let you get away with your little jibe at the Tories in that, but I've got to move now on to my brilliant and esteemed panel. Come on, Kelvin, what would you have made the Sun headline back in your day when this was
it's not only handing out this money to these people. That guy that was quoted in the article there, he was banged up for 6 years for drugs. Now, 6 years is a substantial sentence. On top of the £1,500, he got a discount off off the time he was going to spend in there. So instead of spending 3 years, which is preposterous anyway, actually, he only did 2.
It saves a lot more money, though, because it costs whatever it does.
It does, but what is the point? This is an incentive for saying, I tell you what, not only can we be illegals here, we go into the drugs business, we make quite a lot of money, since the whole of London, as far as I can tell from the atmosphere out there, is actually full of drugs. We're going to make a lot of money. We go in there, we get 6 years, we'll be out in 2, right? And then, by the way, given us £1,500, we go back there. The whole position for ordinary people, and I don't agree with you. The idea that chap there came up with this idea that we should actually increase the amount so that they can resettle and have a life in Albania. Do you know what? There are a lot of problems in our own country to deal with before worrying about whether somebody is skint and living in Albania.
Oh, no.
The point of this is it saves money. So what you do, it saves money for the taxpayer. So what you're doing is, rather than keeping them in prison for a year, costing £40,000, you're giving them £1,500 to go home. They therefore don't try and stay. They don't use the court system to hang on. This has been going on since 2006, and it's a good way. It doesn't just happen to Albanians, it happens to any foreign national prisoner.
Well, it doesn't seem to happen to Jamaicans, does it?
Well, it does.
On any regular basis. Mainly the planes are turned around on the runway, and we find that...
No, those are ones who don't want to go back. Yeah. The ones who get £1,500, they've refused not to have any further appeals, they've agreed not to, and they agree to go back willingly.
All we're doing is we are incentivising illegals to become criminals on a number of bases. One, that the illegality of drugs gets you a substantial sentence. You'll never serve it, and then you'll get flown home effectively.
It is quite an incentive, isn't it? Why don't you just become a drug dealer, sneak into the UK, make the money from drug dealing? The worst that will happen is you'll get a sentence that is reduced to practically nothing, and then you'll go home, you'll get 1,500 quid to go home with. You start all over again.
Well,
and you've got all the money from your drug deal.
But you won't get the second 1,500 if you come back and get caught a second time. It's a one-off. The 1,500 is going to be a one-off payment.
We would hope, yes.
But
you come back under a false name wearing a moustache.
Well, I'm sure some people try. But it's obviously sensible from the taxpayer's point of view, if you're saving money on foreigners being in our prisons, that you can actually get them sent back to their own countries. The Albanian system at the moment is working quite well in the sense we actually have a returns policy with Albania that we don't have with the rest of Europe and should have.
And the returns policy with Albania has stopped them coming over in the small boats. That bit's been very successful.
We don't know that bit, do we?
I thought we did know that.
Yes,
we know the numbers have gone shooting down.
Yeah, and we think, as far as the last thing I saw on this was that it was actually the Albanian connection which had gone down dramatically.
But that's the returns policy from December, which if they're connected, the fact that we're sending them back, they're the only people we're able to send back at the moment, but that's because we've got an agreement with the country to send them back. We should have that agreement we lost through Brexit with every other European country.
The Dublin Agreement never worked. We weren't able to send people back, and actually under earlier international treaties, you can always send back to the first safe country, but we just don't.
But it is true, isn't it, that the dramatic jump has followed the Brexit vote, hasn't it? The dramatic jump in the number of people coming to our country through the boat system has been entirely due to the fact that people perceive that they can't be thrown out because we're no longer a member of the EU.
No, because they were coming in other routes.
No, but we weren't able. No, you're being disingenuous.
No,
we don't know what that number was that were on the trucks. We do know what the numbers are that are in the boats.
We managed to deal with the trucks problem. That's the point. And that every time you squeeze the balloon in one place, the balloon pops out in another. And people weren't taking the small boats route when they could come in on the lorries.
I don't buy that argument. I do not believe that there were 160,000 that were in the back of large trucks.
Don't you think Nigel's made a very good point?
I doubt it. He's from the left.
That was a genius point. The taxpayer's saving £40,000 on 1 year in prison. It's paying out £1,500. So it's net £38,500. Benefit to the taxpayer by getting rid of these people. Yeah, one or two of them may try and get back in. Most of them won't succeed. Everyone's a winner.
No, look, first of all, among all the money that is wasted in our country, right, the 40,000 of keeping people in jails, to my mind, is a fantastic investment, right? And secondly, it just means that these people are illegal that are wandering around our countries, right? So therefore, the fact they can carry out crime, but know that there is actually a pot of money at the end of it, and even the size of the sentence is going to be discounted beyond the 50%, is absolutely ridiculous.
Nigel, have the last word.
Yeah, just so that they still serve their sentence as a British prisoner.
They don't serve their sentence. That's the point, Nigel.
Only the last year is cut off, and I still think the saving in money is worthwhile.
Well, it's something that's good for the taxpayer. Thanks to my panel. As ever, we contacted the Home Office, but we are yet to hear back. Coming up after the intermission, our fanatical friends at Just Stop Oil have found their way into Parliament without actually standing for election. I can only imagine this is because they weren't confident enough they would win any seats. And don't forget the curious case of the car chase with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, the speeding Sussex scramble. All will be revealed shortly.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Alison has a brilliant question. The answer is no, I'm afraid. Can I have £1,500 for staying on the right side of the law? Kathy, I've never heard of such nonsense. Who came up with this ridiculous idea? God help us, we will have the rest of the world coming here. Just Stop Oil protesters were escorted out of a committee meeting today for interrupting an investigation into the arrests of over 60 members of the public during the coronation. 5 of the 15 Just Stop Oil protesters who were arrested on the day of His Majesty's coronation were in attendance at the meeting, who, funnily enough, decided to stand up and protest. Have a quick look.
So it sort of links together and then there's a combination on it. So it would have been unusual, which I think is why it would have aroused suspicion of the officers.
You usually use a combination lock to stop.
We're here today to be called democracy.
Come on, officer. Come on, officer. Do your job. Come on, officer. No, we're not having this. Come on, officer.
Well, this meeting was held to dispute the actions of the police, and these protesters just proved, if not anything else, that there's little thought behind the actions of their campaign. But I'm joined now by Just Stop Oil spokesman Emma Brown, who I'm very grateful to because, unlike the Extinction Rebellion group, she is willing to come on to defend her views. So, Emma, thank you for coming on. Do you think this type of protest helps when the committee was actually looking into whether you'd been treated properly during the coronation?
Hi, Jacob. Thank you for having me on. I've been told I've got 3 minutes, so we don't want to spend too long, I guess, talking about why people that have been wrongfully arrested for protesting are protesting being wrongfully arrested. I think that's pretty obvious. I think the real question is why your government's still continuing to issue oil and gas licenses when even school children know that this is incompatible with us, like, having the basics that we need to survive. I mean, I learned about this.
The very obvious reason for issuing more licenses is that either we get the oil and gas from abroad or we use our domestic supplies.
That you know better than the world.
We're going to need oil and gas for decades to come. We might as well use our own. It is less environmentally damaging. There are fewer emissions using our own gas supplies than importing them.
Jacob, how are you in charge here? This is
because
ridiculous.
That's true. I mean, that's simply factually true.
That is why ordinary people are having to do this, because you're spouting this absolute nonsense. If you burn fossil fuels, it warms up the planet, that dries up fresh water sources.
This is not an issue about.
Can you survive without food,
This
Jacob?
is not
Would
an
you
issue
prefer to
about
eat coal?
burning fossil fuels. This is about where the fossil fuels come from. If we take gas from the North Sea,
away from fossil
it is
fuels,
less
and we're an island
environmentally
nation that has massive capacity in wind,
it is less
tidal and
environmentally
solar
problematic
energy. That's
than if
obvious.
it's
We're an island
liquefied and
nation.
brought in.
Scotland is doing it. I live in Scotland. Why have you banned onshore wind in England? It's ridiculous.
Well,
if your
onshore wind's a
government can't
separate
make
issue.
rational
You've switched.
decisions, then why should we
You've
trust
switched
you?
from the oil
Why
and
should
gas
we put our
licenses.
lives in your hands when you're destroying the country anyway,
let's continue.
destroying the NHS and driving down living standards in
You're
this
changing on to
country?
a lot of subjects.
I don't
Let's
know
just
why you're on
stick
this
to the
programme
oil and gas
and
licenses.
shouting absolute
Because
nonsense.
I don't know
why
whether you
I'm
took
here, to be
notice of the
honest,
Climate
because
Change
you just get
Committee.
people on to spout your nonsense.
Did you take notice of the Climate Change Committee that said if we used...
about ordinary people.
Yes, if you just talk, we're not going to get anywhere.
Our lives.
Let's try and answer questions. Let me put a question and then you try and answer, and then we'll see where we get. The Climate Change Committee pointed out that if we had gas from hydraulic fracturing, shale gas, it would, per kilowatt hour, emit between 2 and 64 cubic centimetres less of carbon dioxide than if we imported it from the US or Qatar. So isn't it better to use our domestic sources? It is less emitting.
Eton education is you're picking one small fact that you think can then destroy the actual argument. The argument is we need to be moving away from fossil fuels towards other renewable clean technologies, which have vastly improved over the last decades and which your government is actively restricting.
But the government's doing that.
Restricting wind power. Actively restricting all this amazing engineering and possibility.
But that's just not true. We've had a greater expansion of offshore wind power than any other country in the world. We're a global leader in that technology.
The bizarre thing that you must have learned at Eton, where you pick one small fact and you think that that can dissuade people from understanding the reality.
It's quite a big fact.
Extract and burn fossil fuels and opening a coal mine is going in the bloody wrong direction, isn't it?
No, isn't it better to use our own coal rather than to import coal?
Don't you live down south? I thought it was 40 degrees last year. Did you not feel that? Do you think that going to Eton is going to protect you from the laws of physics?
I really don't think my education has much to do with this subject at all. I think it's a red herring. But surely it is better for jobs in the UK to be created by having coal than to import them from abroad, using all the transport costs and emissions that come from that.
Set up by the fossil fuel industry. Even they're saying we can't have any new fossil fuels. So why you think that you know better? This is the problem. We've got people in power making decisions on something.
Because we're going to be using, everyone accepts we're going to be using fossil fuels for decades.
I've got people working with me in Just Stop Oil that are doing PhDs in renewables, that are scientists, that are teachers, that are educators, that are doctors. Kush, that you saw standing up in Parliament, he's a doctor. He's a 33-year-old doctor in infectious diseases.
That's the real challenge to you. You mentioned standing for Parliament. So let me give you one final question. Why don't you stop protesting and use democratic mechanisms to win your argument? If your argument's so popular, why don't you stand for Parliament?
Make decisions that understand.
You see, we never get an answer to this. Why don't you stand for Parliament and try and win elections? I saw a march by Just Stop Oil around Parliament Square. There are only about a dozen of you. You've got no support. Nobody votes for you. All you can do is protest. Why don't you stand for Parliament?
60% of the public support our demands.
Well, stand for Parliament and see if they'll vote for you then.
Standing for Parliament, which just goes to show that you do not understand the urgency of this situation.
I understand democracy, and that's where we disagree. Thank you very much for coming on. I hope you'll join me again. But I've got my brilliant panel to carry on this discussion. Nigel Nelson, the former senior political commentator of the Sunday People, and Kelvin Mackenzie, and we all know where he comes from. Come on, Nigel. Don't you think the Just Stop Oil people discredit the whole Green movement? They're so fanatical.
Well, that did, on the basis that the subject was the fact they launched a protest at a Home Affairs Committee, which was actually investigating whether or not the police behaved properly by arresting Republic protesters and Just Stop Oil protesters over the coronation. I mean, obviously, there was a clue there by the fact they're wearing T-shirts and so on. You were pretty sure that a disruption was coming. What I can't see is the point of that disruption. When the MPs were doing a perfectly good job at giving the police a hard time and saying, how could you do this? How could you make this mistake?
Yeah, they were actually on the side to an extent.
Well, that's right, and it just sort of ruins it.
And the number of supporters is tiny, that they are managing to bring London to a halt with a couple of dozen people. They don't have this popular support that they think they've got.
No, I think largely because of the tactics. That I think that their general view, what they're trying to do, is perfectly reasonable. What isn't reasonable is stopping London or stopping anywhere else, or stopping an ambulance getting through by gluing themselves to a motorway. That is where they're going to form. That's why the support is not coming through.
But does the extremism that they show damage the whole Green movement, make people think that it's all a bunch of extremists and actually we've just got to get on with our lives?
No, I don't think it does that, because I mean, in mainstream politics, we've got quite a big argument going on between Labour and your party. I mean, Labour is basing the idea of getting the fastest growth in the G7 on a really ambitious green policy for Britain. So it would be things like doubling onshore wind farms, trebling solar power, quadrupling offshore wind farms. So that's quite a big kind of idea. So I don't think it takes away from the argument. And I don't think there's a problem about protesting and making an extra point, stop oil. Where it all goes wrong is the methods they use to do it.
But Kelvin, isn't it rather marvellous you get a group of eccentrics in a very English way who go out and cause a bit of trouble?
I don't
expect this of the British people.
I don't know how many people are watching your show right now. I suspect around about 80,000 people. That was a good opportunity for her to make some decent points about a massive issue. She actually chose to do the complete opposite. She decided to shout at random like that. That would have killed it. And the issue about Just Stop Oil is it makes a lot of noise, but people recognise that it's there just to disrupt, not to change. People know that they can shout as much as they like on the M25. There was a shocking piece of video the other day where a guy was absolutely at his wit's end. I tell you what it was. It was in the Elephant and Castle, right? And he gave the C word, the F word, the B word. In fact, there were words there I never heard towards these people. And I know through my Twitter followers that tens of thousands piled in to say he was speaking on our behalf. People do not wish to see these people win, and these people can't make a decent argument.
But doesn't it affect the whole argument? Because actually, the idea that we're going to have to wear hair shirts and live in caves and not have any electricity is all for the birds.
For the birds.
And that we need to keep our houses warm and we need to keep energy cheap. And that these fanatics are exposing the Green movement as something that's fundamentally unrealistic.
Yeah, no, I do buy that. I do buy that it actually these mad people are not the centre of the argument. And I think most ordinary people love the idea of the wind farms out at sea, or may even like them on land. I'm not quite so sure about that, but at sea...
But eventually we will end oil. I mean, oil is a finite
Not in your lifetime,
No, I don't
Nigel.
think in my lifetime. But I don't know what will happen to oil-producing countries when we do. Goodness knows, the Middle East could explode again. We're off the subject, but oil is coming to an end.
Gladstone thought we would run out of coal in 1964 and was very worried about that. We've always been worried about running out of things. But coming up, the moment you've all been waiting for. Their Royal Highnesses, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex alleged car chase. What actually happened? Has there been any exaggeration? I hope we will have some answers after these messages from our sponsors, because Sherlock Mogg is on the case.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel. Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Ian, don't bother arguing with her. You can't educate pork, as my old maths teacher used to say. That's a new one on me. She'll just keep regurgitating the same old twaddle. Alan, I predict a Hollywood car chase movie and a tell-all book from the Duke and Duchess of Sussex rather than the Duke and Duchess of Hazzard. Anyway, this evening, a spokesman for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex has claimed that the couple were involved in a near-catastrophic car collision in the middle of New York City last night. Their spokesman has said the incident was at the hands of a ring of highly aggressive paparazzi. But in an interview this evening between their driver and the Washington Post, the driver said he would not call the incident a chase, adding that he felt safe during the ride. Here's New York City Mayor Eric Adams' interpretation of the events.
I would find it hard to believe that there was a 2-hour high-speed chase. That would be, I find it hard to believe, but we will find out the exact duration of it. But if it's 10 minutes, a 10-minute chase is extremely dangerous in New York City.
Well, who do you believe? A prince of the blood royal or the mayor of New York? Kelvin, who do you believe?
Well, the mayor of New York, it would be very much in his interests if he thought that a load of paparazzi had gone mad and were causing a massive problem to two high-profile people. He chose not to do that, right? So I believe what he says. And, of course, it drops Harry and Meghan right in it now, because they have got to try and prove now to a public that many of in the public now no longer believe a word they say. And not only that, are they actually trying to attract more publicity for themselves for some other charity, book sale, a documentary on Netflix? If this isn't 100% true, and it looks highly unlikely, I mean, I've lived in New York, right? The idea that you could even have a 2-minute car chase is really preposterous. I think they will have caused themselves a lot of trouble.
But Nigel, weren't they just quite reasonably trying to protect their privacy, which is so much of what they're aiming to do, so that they can go from an event back to where they're staying privately without being bothered. Isn't that reasonable of them? And that if they were chased, that's clearly wrong.
Yeah, of course it's wrong, and especially in light of what happened to Harry's mother. So if it was paparazzi chasing them like that, then absolutely. I mean, British newspapers wouldn't buy those pictures that the paparazzi take. I mean, they haven't done for years. I mean, I agree with Kelvin. The idea of a 2-hour car chase through New York. I was living in New York the same time Kelvin was.
But it does depend.
It just couldn't happen.
But don't you remember the O.J. Simpson car chase?
Which wasn't through the streets of New York.
That was in LA,
but it wasn't at high speed. So a car chase doesn't necessarily have to be at 90 miles an hour.
No, but there's an awful lot of traffic in the way in New York, so it would make it a bit difficult to actually do. I mean, there are two issues here. It sounds
they could have stopped politely at the lights and then gone on afterwards.
But it sounds like we've got a mayor who's trying not to insult Harry and Meghan, because it does look like Harry and Meghan, at the very least, have exaggerated what happened. It doesn't excuse paparazzi photographers chasing on motorbikes, trying to catch up with a car, causing potential danger by doing it. But I think we have to wait now, I agree with you, to see where Harry and Meghan go with it.
I must say that I hesitate to identify with a couple who enjoy exploiting their own privacy for money and at the same time complaining when somebody else wants to exploit their privacy for money. I have no sympathy for them. I'm not in favour of anybody getting hurt, and nobody did get hurt. I found it utterly bizarre that they felt so alarmed by this that they ended up inside a police station in order to protect themselves. I mean, these people didn't have guns. This wasn't some mad Miami backstreet. They were there. They said that they felt threatened by half a dozen paparazzi.
But Nigel made the very
ludicrous.
fair point that after what happened to Diana, Princess of Wales, understandably, the Duke of Sussex might be rather sensitive to the paparazzi chasing after him, even if at not necessarily very high speed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part is perfectly reasonable. I mean, a lot changed after that. I mean, now newspapers certainly make absolutely certain the provenance of a picture, that it was taken properly in public, that there was no harassment. There are a lot of checks and balances going on. So the paparazzi are a different breed from your average photographer.
But what about Kelvin's point? Do they invade their own privacy, or are you allowed to say, look, this is my property, I'm allowed to express it and tell you this, but it's not your business to open my bedroom window?
Privacy is a question of degree. You've invaded your privacy by becoming a public figure as an MP and then a minister. It doesn't mean you should have no privacy at all after that. It just depends on the degree of it, that you will have less privacy than the private citizen. Same goes for Harry and Meghan. As Kelvin has just said, they've exploited the media for their own ends. They can't expect, as public figures, which they are, and they seem to become more public on the basis of that, they can't then expect that kind of privacy to last.
And Kelvin, won't there be some pictures? New York has not as many CCTV cameras as London, but it's got lots of people with iPhones.
Yeah, there will be, and I suspect they might be quite dramatic. What I can't understand is what normally these stars do, and they are stars, is they normally say, right, here's the deal, we'll get out, take these pictures and then leave us alone. That way they can make their money on a global basis.
Well, I, as always, am going to believe a prince of the blood royal. So thank you to my panel for this. That's all from me. Up next, it's the great Dan Wootton. What's on your bill of fare tonight?
Oh, Jacob, well, we're continuing that discussion. I have to say Harry and Meghan's story is unravelling so quickly. We're calling this now the fast and the spurious. We've got Paul Burrell, Princess Diana's rock. He's very angry, actually, at the way Harry has tonight in the Times newspaper invoked his mother's death, talking about this incident. So Paul Burrell is going to react live very shortly.
Well, that'll, I'm sure, be extraordinarily interesting. I hope you'll be sympathetic to members of the royal family, just as a matter of policy. But that's coming up later. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, but now we've got the weather, and it'll be glorious in Somerset. It always is.
Hello again, it's Aidan McKibben here with the GB News forecast brought to you by the Met Office. Cloudy and damp in the far north, but drier elsewhere, and there'll be some areas of broken cloud, but also some clear spells over the next 24 hours. High pressure firmly in charge. However, that high pressure is extending from the southwest. It's covering much of England and Wales, while Scotland and Northern Ireland